Hello everyone! This video is dedicated to the topic of workplace mobbing, which is also known as workplace bullying or work abuse or emotional abuse at workplace. More than 95% of workplaces in the United States do not have collaborative culture. Peter Drucker says that culture eats policy for breakfast every day of the week. Given these statistics, it is likely that you work in an institution where workplace mobbing might happen. In this video, I am going to summarize some information that is supported by research of Swedish and American psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, social workers about workplace mobbing. The topic of workplace mobbing is fairly well researched. However, the findings of the research remain to be a secret not only to the general public but to health professionals. Given how pervasive this phenomenon is, you will be really well equipped with this short summary of the research on workplace mobbing. So the first order of business is to discuss the terminology. So as I already mentioned before, workplace mobbing is sometimes described using terms workplace bullying, workplace abuse, work abuse, emotional abuse at workplace. A mob is a disorderly crowd engaged in lawless violence. Mobile vulgus in Latin means vacillating crowd. In 1960s, Konrad Lorenz used the term mobbing to behavior in animals where a group of smaller animals would engage in a behavior that would scare off a bigger animal. In 1970s, Dr. Peter Paul Leymann used the term mobbing to group behavior in children, and he used the term mobbing versus bullying to emphasize the severity of the consequences of the behavior, which sometimes would be suicide of the target of the mobbing. And then in 1980s, Dr. Heinz Leymann in Sweden discovered similar behavior in adults at workplaces. So the next order of business is to discuss what is mobbing. So Heinz Leymann, the pioneer of the research on workplace mobbing, has identified 5 phases of workplace mobbing. I'm going to read these 5 phases for you from this book, Mobbing, Emotional Abuse in the American Workplace, by Davenport, Schwarz, and Elliott. So the first phase of workplace mobbing is characterized by a critical incident, a conflict. In itself, this is not yet mobbing. It can, however, develop into mobbing behaviors. The second phase of workplace mobbing is characterized by aggressive acts and psychological assaults that set the mobbing dynamics into motion. The third phase of workplace mobbing involves management that plays a part in the negative cycle by misjudging the situation if they have not already been participating in phase 2. Instead of extending support, they begin the isolation and expulsion process. The fourth phase of workplace mobbing is critical, as victims are now branded as difficult or worse, mentally ill. This misjudgment by management and health professionals reinforces the negative cycle. It almost always will lead to expulsion or forced resignation. And the last and the fifth phase of workplace mobbing is the expulsion. The trauma of this event can additionally trigger post-traumatic stress disorder. After the expulsion, the emotional distress and the ensuing psychosomatic illnesses continue and often intensify. So these are the 5 phases of workplace mobbing. So the third aspect of workplace mobbing that I would like to discuss in this video consists of the psychological underpinnings and some examples of workplace mobbing. Dr. Leymann has identified several sets of behaviors that happen during workplace mobbing. I'm not going to list all of these behaviors. They are available in the book from which I have just read, and it is linked in the description to this video, but I want to give you some psychological underpinnings of mobbing. They sort of explain of why mobbing occurs. And just a few examples just to give you a flavor and a taste, and that should be a very short introduction into these behaviors that can be useful for you to begin to recognize if it might be happening to you or somebody you love or somebody you care about or just in your unit. So what are the psychological underpinnings of workplace mobbing? So typically for workplace mobbing to occur, there has to be a mismatch between the attitudes of the individual toward collaboration, power and authority, and their work and what they believe about themselves and their place in the world. And on the other hand, the same kind of attitudes in the environment and the culture of the environment. So if an individual believes in collaborating culture, and it's not just that they believe in it, but their innate way of relating to other people is more collaborative, and it's not based on competition, it's not based on trying to usurp power, and if they work in an institution where the culture is very competitive and not collaborative, if they find themselves in an environment where the attitude in the group of people with whom they work is fundamentally different from their own attitude toward collaboration and work, that's when mobbing may occur. So let me now give you a few examples of mobbing behaviors. So one example of mobbing behavior is an abuse by proxy. So suppose Jim is the target of mobbing in his workplace. And he has just a little bit of a small tension with Paul, the kind of tension that occurs on a regular basis at workplaces and would have been resolved between Jim and Paul amicably. And then all of a sudden, their boss steps in and acts in such a way that this little tension between Jim and Paul grows into a full-blown conflict between Jim and Paul. Now, Paul is a proxy in this situation. Through this proxy, the boss is executing his abuse of Jim, but Paul has no idea about what is going on. Another type of workplace abuse is triangulation. So let's assume we have, again, two people, Jim and Paul. So Jim is the target of abuse and Paul is his coworker. So let's just suppose that Paul and Jim are not in the same type of position, that they should not be competing against each other, not even according to the institutional policies or norms. However, somehow their boss and the environment around them makes them feel as if they should be competing against each other. So this is called triangulation, right? So this relationship between Jim and his boss is now triangulated into Jim and Paul and his boss. And now all of a sudden, somehow Paul is a player in this relationship where it's not even clear why this should be the case. So another example of workplace abuse is based on this psychoanalytic concept of projection. So suppose Jim's boss has been abusive toward Jim for quite a while, and he has put Jim down and criticized him overly harshly or unfairly, and including in front of his coworkers. So now the entire unit around Jim knows that Jim's boss is not pleased with Jim's work, and that Jim is in some kind of trouble. And let's say that Paula has just had an argument with one of her colleagues, and she's frustrated after that argument, and she comes and she talks to Jim, and she shows a lot of negative emotion toward Jim, and that emotion did not originate with Jim, it has originated with Paula's argument with her colleague, but she did not confront her colleague, just without even realizing this, Paula has harassed Jim, and she's not even conscious of that, because projection is usually when a person is not even conscious of what is going on. Another example of workplace abuse, let's just say that Jim has been assigned an unreasonable amount of work. So for example, every few months, Jim's boss changes the requirements and the format of how Jim needs to submit his work to his boss, right? So this is the kind of work that is meaningless and useless, and Jim has to change the way he formats his work every few months, and it takes him a lot of effort, and it takes him a lot of hours to work on that, and he feels undermined because his qualification is way higher and he should not be doing this formatting work. Another example would be, suppose that Jim is a supervisor to other employees and he's put under the pressure to make decisions without enough information, and he keeps making these decisions and he keeps making mistakes because he's not provided with enough information, and then sooner or later he gets into trouble because he makes mistakes. So another example of workplace abuse is that Jim feels isolated, so people stop talking to him, and there is a rumor about Jim going on in the office that Jim doesn't even know about, but he feels that when he enters the room becomes silent. He feels that he has this sense that people might be talking about him behind his back, but he has no proof of that. And Jim may even become paranoid. And so the reason why Jim feels more and more isolated is because people want to distance themselves from Jim, because somehow, consciously or unconsciously, they have this sense that if it's not Jim, then somebody else will sooner or later become target of mobbing, and they just do not want to be that target. So in an abusive culture, mobbing it just kind of has to occur. It's like you have all of the chemicals in place, and the chemical reaction is going to occur sooner or later. So I hope that these examples of workplace mobbing give you a good enough idea of what it might look like. So the fourth and the last portion of this video is to provide you with just at least a few tips about how to deal with workplace mobbing, just in case you feel like you might be a target of workplace mobbing. My first and foremost advice would be to make sure that you engage in self-care. I have mentioned this in one of the other videos on emotional abuse, which is linked down below in the description of this video. So make sure that you engage in self-care, so you take care of yourself physically, emotionally, on the social level, and on a spiritual level. The second advice, it's not good to give an advice to not do something, but I'm going to say do not rush into doing anything before you research and study and realize the consequences. Be extremely aware of what mobbing is and arm yourself with this knowledge, with the research, and really try to understand what is going on. And the third piece of advice is make sure that workplace mobbing does not isolate you from your friends outside of work and from your loved ones. Make sure that you are not the one who is doing projection with the people who love you and are happy to support you. Talk to them about what is going on and make sure that you are not alone. It was difficult for me to prepare this video because this is very difficult material, but somebody has to be talking about it. So I hope that this information has been helpful to you. I hope that this video was informative. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Please consider supporting this video with likes. I always like to read any comments that people leave. I am so grateful for my subscribers and for all of those who return to this channel to listen to this information. I just feel like I'm so blessed to have this kind of support, and if you want to be notified when the next video comes out, you can ring a bell, and I will be in touch with you soon through subsequent videos.